know what that means, that music. It's time for classical gas. One of the theme shows I completely forgot we were doing before the pandemic. I'm stopping that for several reasons, one of which I don't want to get, the more I play it, the more likely I'll be sued. We did this is one of the many theme shows we used to do before the pandemic came. And we all had to hide from the virus. But now, since Donald Trump and Boris Johnson have solved it and saved all our lives, we don't need to wear masks. We can go dancing in the streets. You know, I share my popsicle with people I meet walking down the street. I just share popsicles with them. We're not worried anymore, and everything's been taken care of, and we all have good health care. So we can go back to our old theme shows. And one of them was called Classical Gas. And the premise was we would look at books that were classics that, you know, kind of like this week we're going to talk about Emile Zola. This is Germinal, one of the books that he wrote. It's about the miners or something, miners in France. And the other book I've had for a million years was La Sauvois. I don't even know what that means, but these are like Penguin classics. I've always had them and always meant to read them. I never read them. I must have had them 50 years. And we're going to ask a certain question with this now, because I decided to take this excellent theme show concept and turn it into an even better one, which we're going to actually rate these classics. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask ourselves a question, which is it really worthwhile reading classic books by these big shots who are dead, Emile Zola being one of them? And we're going to have 3 ratings for it. Hell yeah. So Maupassant, right? I mean, Maupassant is a hell yeah, and Tolstoy is a hell yeah. Henry James, I don't care. If you love him, that's great. I don't get excited when I read Henry James. And then hell no, and there's lots of hell no's out there, but I'll be honest with you, I forget who they are. So, you know, Longfellow, I guess. You don't want to read Longfellow, do you? And so anyway, that's our basic premise. We're going to ask that question. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why I've never read Zola, because I've had him around forever, and I always meant to read Emile Zola. Now, he's always been an interesting figure to me. For example, I've used his essay, The Naturalistic Novel. He created the term naturalism, and it comes out of a notion of determinism, which is, you know, that people are determined by their genetics and by their history and by the social networks they come out of and by their neighborhoods, and that they determine human life and human activity and politics, and they make things happen, and that individuals don't do anything. We're just basically at the whim of this world. So he had this idea, and he basically said he wanted to write novels as if they were laboratory experiments. So he would write books set in a certain neighborhood of Paris, for example, and he would spend months there taking notes of everything, the way people talked, what they ate, what they were like, what their families were like. And he would put it all in this big stew of research. Now, all of that made him interesting to me as a figure, and really made him boring to me as a writer. There's something about all those ideas and this kind of deterministic approach to literature. So I was always preferred this sort of, you know, I'm a Flaubert fan. You know, I like L'Amour Juste, the notion that the novel is this kind of perfect piece of work of art, and it's better than life. I like that idea of literature. And so it seemed a little, I don't know, it's a little off-putting. Now, I love naturalistic novels, so it's sort of unfair. I mean, I love, you know, Dos Passos, and I like Steinbeck, and like writers like that. But at the same time, I sort of never got around to Zola. I always got the feeling that he was a little too programmatic. And he was also a very big, important political figure. So you get this feeling he was a very strong opponent of republicanism in France, and he was the guy who wrote the famous letter about the Dreyfus affair, where he had to actually leave town because everyone was mad at him. He was one that called the military on being anti-Semitic, and he was a very active person. He sounded like a great guy, but I didn't want to read him. And every time I looked at one of his books, they looked kind of boring. Okay, so that's my setup. Finally, the other thing I never could decide is that this is a series of books. He wrote 20 novels in a series called I can't remember it, ROUGONS novels. Do not write me and tell me how to pronounce it. I don't give a fuck. The ROUGONS novels. It's probably wrong, but it's basically the name of these two two offshoots of the single family. Okay, so it's a family, and it's a family history over 20 novels. All the people go off to different parts of France and often to Paris, and it's taken place during the period about 1848 is when they start, during the Republican Revolution in Paris, where the government collapses, republicanism is out in the streets, as revolutionaries want to take over this country and turn it into something that's not just for rich people. And at the same time, Louis Napoleon comes in and establishes the Second Empire. Don't quote my, I don't want to hear about history either, I've got it all wrong. But the Second Empire, and there's a very repressive regime, which, we're teetering on this. It's a very topical, it's a very timely series of books for us. So anyway, that's the historical background. And then he goes into all these different lives that come out of it through this one family. Okay, all of that sounds interesting. Never wanted to read it. The other thing that kind of put me off and made me confused was everyone kept saying you can read any of these books individually. They're in sequence, but you can read them individually. You don't need to read them in the sequence. And yet Zola wrote these 20 novels and late in life gave a preferred order. He didn't write them in order, but he gave a preferred order late in his life of how to read them. I could never decide, should I start at the beginning or start in the middle one, and the famous ones are later, and so forth. So finally I picked up the first one. The first book in the series is called The Fortune of the ROUGONS. Now I got this, it looks nice, it's interesting. New translation by Brian Nelson, who's done some great stuff for Oxford University Press. He's I guess either translated or overseeing the translation of the entire series of novels. And at the same time, it was the first in the series, and everyone kept saying, yeah, it's been out of print for years. There's never been many. It's not in lots of editions like L'Assommoir has been, or Germinal. It's kind of it seems almost like a black sheep of the series. And even the introduction to this book says, well, it's kind of an awkward novel, structurally kind of weird, blah, blah. All right. So finally I bit the bullet. I said, well, I'm going to try. I was going to read Proust all summer. And then we solved the pandemic, and I thought, well, I don't need to. Now the pandemic's all solved by these geniuses. I'll find something else. I thought I'd try the first volume of this series. And I was thinking, well, it's going to be classics. I'm going to be kind of dragging my ass through it and stuff. I got about 5 pages into this book, and I was totally hooked. This is one of the greatest fucking classics I have ever read. I love this book. I read it in 2 days. I actually just taped. I don't only tape one of these like every week or two, but I wanted to tape it quickly before I forgot all the great stuff in it. And it's already hard to keep it all in. There's so much happening in it. So much so that after I created this stupid rating system, I decided to add another category. So I created a phony, arbitrary rating system, and then I broke it immediately. And if there's children in the room, send them out of the room, because this is an adult show about books. And I'm putting this here. This is the fuck yeah. Is it worth reading? And then we'll put 2 exclamation points. This is one of the best classics I've ever read. I loved reading it. It's about this family who come to become the family that they are just during this shift from the Republican Revolution to the repressive all the old monarchists and aristocrats take over and basically quell this insurrection bloodily and violently. It's a very politically interested novel. It never takes a political stand, though Zola's position is pretty clear. He moves from all the different characters, most of whom are rogues and scoundrels. Most of the family is awful people. And you're in most of their heads, and you just are with them. They're just so self-interested, and they're so much looking at the world of politics like they want to see things, and so much out for themselves, you can't help kind of being on their side to some extent. Very quickly, I'm going to do this. I tried to do this once before, and I completely forgot the background. But there's actually one of these family charts. This is another thing that puts me off. I see a family chart at the beginning of a classic novel. I just, oh Christ, I'm not going to read that. But basically, the story is that this guy, there was a guy named Fuqua, I can't pronounce this. And there's a man who works for this family, okay? and he marries the daughter of the family and takes over they're basically peasants. They own this kind of farm and they sell produce and they sell stuff in the stores. And he basically takes over this family. And they have a child together named Pierre Rougon, who's kind of the chief villain in this book. He's the old father. And then the original father, the first father, who was married to this woman who's known as Tante Didi, because she's the grandmother in this, who's a really interesting character. He dies, and again, it's only 2 days ago. So much happened in this book. He dies, and she takes up with this guy in town who's basically a total womanizing creep. He's a smuggler and a gun runner, and he lives in town in some dump. And he and this woman who's widower start having this very, very passionate affair. She builds a door between her home and his place. And the whole town is talking. She's a slut. She's this. But she's just full of life, and she's in love with this guy. And he disappears for ages, and then comes back, and then disappears for ages, and comes back. They have 2 kids. I think they're unmarried. I'm pretty sure they're not married. I can't remember now. They have 2 kids, and that's Antoine and a girl named Ursula, who I think shows up in one of the later books. I haven't got to that anyway. So they have some kids, and that's the Marquardt group. And then there's the Rougon group. Now, the Rougon group is kind of the scoundrels who live in town and who start to develop the family. Pierre marries this woman in town, and they try to be successful. They have 3 kids, 3 boys. They are all, 2 of them are total assholes who just basically just take money from their parents. And they're both lazy. They're both lazy assholes. They just take money. They waste away what little money the family has. And then one guy named Pascal, who's a doctor, who's actually a nice guy. He's not like a Chekhov type guy. He actually cares about his patients. He's into research. He's into intellectual thought. He doesn't lie to people and say, "Oh, you're going to be better in the morning." He just tells people what he knows, and no one wants him as a doctor. Nobody wants him because he's just too kind of straightforward. He's got no bedside manner. So he says, "Great, I'll just do research." He's happy in town. And Pascal is rarely in the book, but he's the only character. He always tries to care for people and wants to do things that are right. So these other 2 brothers, Eugene goes to Paris and becomes a lawyer and hangs out with all these kind of monarchists and all these royalists and gets in. He basically insinuates himself into all these places. And Antoine, the other one I forget, he stays in town and becomes a journalist, I think. Now, this all takes place, again, then we go from them, we go to the Marquardt family. So the first part of the book is a perfectly structured book. Starts with the Rougons, and then we move to the Marquards. Some of them, there's a number of them gone off and I think died. There's a number of girls who aren't even mentioned. But there's one character in there who's, again, another rogue, another villain, who basically marries some woman because she'll work hard. And he work hard for him and take care of everything. He has kids. He thinks, I don't want to have kids. But then he finds out he can pretty much put the kids in jobs, and the kids will bring home money. He says, "Oh, I'll have kids." He's a total awful man. Now, we've got these 2 families, the Rougons and the Marquardt. And the Rougons, who are kind of in town and kind of mildly respected, they don't really make any money. The parents, Pierre and his wife, basically retire without any money. And the wife, is it Felicite, I think, is always, they rent a place in a good part of town, but it's a crummy rental. And she looks across the street every day at the tax collector's house, which is beautiful. And they're filled with anger. One of the things that you see in Zola, you see in Flaubert, they hate the middle class in Paris. They just hate the French middle class and the bourgeoisie, and they just hate them. And she's looking at this all the time. And finally, eventually, they try to come up with a way to make money. And in their late life, they just try to make some money. And their son Eugene comes to them and says, "Well, look, there's this revolution. The Republicans are taking over. The military and all the wealthy people in town, they're going to crush these people. So what you got to do is get in on the right side of this whole revolution." And from that point on, the parents start hosting parties and insinuating themselves in the connections with all these wealthy families. And meanwhile, the Marquardt side of the family, there's one guy who's he's just as big a scandal as they are, but he supports the Republicans because he really wants to destroy his family. He has no political beliefs at all. He just wants to destroy his family. Now, there's a lot of other characters. There's a young kid named, I can't remember, Silveri, whatever his name is. He's got a girlfriend. They're the sort of the innocents. Basically, if you're innocent in the situation, you get slaughtered. There are some war scenes in this. So eventually, there's a coup in Paris, and this family is trying to figure a way to make money, and they're kind of bickering between themselves, and this the kind of Republicans come out and they say, well, we're not going to allow this coup. We're going to go from town to town, and we're going to take over this country. And as they go around in this small town of Plassans, they don't know what's going on outside in the world. They just know that these people come in, the insurrectionists come in, and they leave, and they think they might take over the world. There's some hilarious scenes in this. When for example, there's a journalist in it who starts off as a Republican, and one of the brothers, Antoine, I want to say. He writes a piece. Oh no, we're against the coup. We really support the Republicans. Blah blah. And then he thinks, well, what if the monarchists win? They'll come and cut my throat. So he runs into the newspaper, tears up all this. He literally tears the printing the print apart because he doesn't want this piece to be published. And he's basically, for the next 100 pages, is going around saying, should I support the Republicans? Should I support them? He doesn't know who to support because he doesn't want to get killed. He just wants to support whoever is the right person. Meanwhile, they don't know what's going on outside this town. There's no telegraphs. They're not getting any information. I was going to read it, but we've already used too much time. The war scenes are some of the most violent. There's one passage where the kid, there's a little young man who goes out to fight the Republicans, with Silveri, I think. He's a good kid. He really believes in this cause. And he's standing in line. They're all the peasants and all the Republicans are standing up to the military. And he looks up next to him, and there's a big woodcutter, big, strong man, totally confident. He says, we're going to go get it. Let's fight for our country. And he says, okay, great. And suddenly there's a bang, a shot, and there's a little chaos. And he turns around, and that guy's dead. The big hero has got a bullet right in his head. And then there's just a scene of just total bloodshed and mayhem. It's one of the few war scenes I've ever read that's absolutely upsetting. And what happens and the total chaos that occurs. And then the violence of the military when they win, going after slaughter these people. It's an extraordinary book. It's incredibly funny. It's one of the first times I've read. I don't like to read historical novels. I don't like to read books and say, oh, I learned about history. But it did make me feel like I understood a little bit more about that world. It's about how this family makes their money, and they make their money by betraying everybody around them. They're total crooks. And the whole family is fascinating. So, I mean, I don't normally read series really quickly, but I'm definitely going to go read. The next one is His Excellency Eugene Rougon, and this is about Eugene who helps manipulate this. His father becomes tax collector, basically, after the other tax collector gets slaughtered. And it's about Eugene basically insinuating himself into the politics of Paris. I really admire this book. I have to say, it's one time when a dead writer, I just thought, what an interesting guy. What a fascinating piece of writing. And for all the politics, the political positions of you recognize, it's still a novel. It doesn't feel like he's sitting there telling me how to think about politics or anything. It really does feel like he's interested in these scoundrels. And the pictures of the aristocracy of this are sometimes hilarious. I went on too long. I had to talk about this because I was so excited to read this book from beginning to the end. That's the other thing. It's not that long a book. Often in classics, Thackeray. Trollope. I'm not saying they're not any good. It's just that when I read them, I found them a little tedious, a little too long. There wasn't a wasted page in this. And I think there was only one small passage where I kind of skimmed a bit, which was with some of the romanticizing of the young couple who are kind of nature. There's a Rousseauian idyll between this young couple who basically gets slaughtered eventually and sort of set them up. And that's the only time I felt a little bit manipulated. The rest of the time, he was in this family, he was in this world, he was concerned about everybody in it, and I really am looking forward to reading some more Zola. So he's not boring classic bullshit. This is great, great fiction. And I definitely would suggest, if you read a Zola, read the first in the series. I don't know. I can't compare it to any of the other books. I just know this is a cracker of a book. It's a great, great read. All right, so that's our pitch. Emile Zola, you were great. You know, keep it up, keep going, Zola. Don't give up. You're gonna be a big hit. All right. I don't know if I should play the music going out again. I think I will. Okay. Happy bathing. Don't worry about the coronavirus. Trump took care of it. It's all set. All right, we're all okay.